Rose Street Art friends. My name is Miss Katelyn, and today we're going to do another music lesson together. There are lots of different types of instruments, and if you remember last week how we talked about how some instruments and sounds are high and some are low, we're going to spend the next couple weeks talking about different types of instruments that play both high and low. So our first group of instruments is all about string instruments that play in the orchestra, which is a big group of musicians who play together. The 5 instruments we're going to talk about from the string family today are the violin, the viola, the cello, the double bass, and the harp. So, a string instrument is called a string instrument because if you look at this picture, there are strings that run from one end of the instrument to the other, which is where the sound comes from. The violin has these strings that you can see that start from here and go all the way up to the end. And the harp, they look more like this. So we're gonna start with our instruments, and we're gonna talk instruments that start, the ones that are the highest, and then we'll talk all the way down to the ones that are the lowest. If you remember from our video last week, were things that were very big, typically very high, or very low? If you said they were low, can you tell me, does it look like our double bass is gonna be lower or higher than our violin? It's gonna be lower than our violin. So we're gonna start at the very top. So our violin is made out of wood in the main body part of the instrument, and it has these strings that run along this black section that's called the fingerboard, when the strings attach to these little pegs at the end. There's a chin rest at the edge of the violin where you can put your chin, and it comes with something called a bow. Now, our first 4 instruments, the violin, the viola, the cello, and the double bass, all have bows. And what that means is that while one of your hands holds the violin, the other hand holds the bow, which is responsible for running across the strings to help make the notes. So this is what this looks like. So here's my chin rest on my violin. Violins typically will rest on the left shoulder, and your left hand sits on the fingerboard and controls the strings, which can help change the notes, and your right hand holds this bow, which has little bits of horsehair on the end that runs across the string either down or up, and it helps it make different sounds. So our violin is gonna sound really high because it's pretty small. So here is a video that's gonna show a little bit about how the violin works. This one only has a picture, but I'll show you. So if you look at him, he's holding it on his shoulder, and he's using the bow, which is what he's holding in his hands, to run across the strings. So if you listen, the violin's pretty high. But then it also can go down low here. So that's a lower note. And then it's gonna go up a little higher. See, a little higher. And some of the highest notes. Okay. So we'll stop this one. Our next instrument that's a little bigger than the violin is called the viola. If you look at them, they're really similar. The viola is only a little bit bigger. It also plays with a bow, and it also rests on your left shoulder, where you put your left hand on the fingerboard and your right hand holds the bow, but it's gonna sound deeper because it's bigger. So here is a video with what the viola sounds like. So you can see her playing it there. Let me turn down the brightness. There we go. So see how it's resting on her shoulder, and she's using the bow with her other hand. And those are notes that are lower than what the violin can play at. So if the viola is our second instrument of the day, that means we're on instrument number 3. Our third instrument, the cello, is so big that you can't rest it on your shoulder like you can with the violin and the viola. The cello actually sits between your legs and sits up on your shoulder, and you still put your left hand up on the fingerboard like we talked about. The fingerboard, remember, is the black part, and your right hand still uses the bow, but you run it this way, and it's a lot lower and deeper. So here, my friends, as soon as we wait for this ad, I'll make this big, and we'll watch what the cello looks like. Okay. So you can hear it's already way deeper than the viola is. Do you see him sitting there? So he's sitting in a chair, and it's leaning on his shoulder. He's running the bow sideways, and it's a lot deeper than definitely the violin and even the viola too. See if he can run his hand up and down, and it changes if the notes are higher and lower. Okay. Our last instrument with a bow is even bigger than the cello. This, my friends, is called the double bass. The double bass is so big that it is as tall as a lot of people are, and they sit on stools behind it because they have to play it because it takes up so much space. But they're gonna play it very similarly to the cello. So they're gonna hold a bow just like this. If you can see how big it is. And it's the lowest one because it's the biggest. You look at how tall it is and how tall he is, it tells you how big it is. So a lot of times people have to use wheels to roll them around because they're so big. Okay. So let's review. We have talked about 4 instruments so far: the violin, the viola, the cello, and the double bass, which all use bows. Our last string instrument today is a little different. It doesn't use a bow, but it still has strings. Friends, do you remember what this is called? If you said a harp, this is our harp. Our harp has the strings that run up and down, and if you look at the bottom, these are pedals. So a harpist, just like a cello and a bass, have to sit while they play. So there's usually a stool, and they'll have one hand on one side of the strings and one hand on the other side of the strings, and they have to use their fingers to run up and down the strings to make the sound. So here is a video of our harp, which usually plays pretty softly. So watch what her hands are doing. They're running up and down, and they're each on different sides. So she can go low and high. So the low side has longer strings because they're bigger. Remember, that means it's lower. And the smaller strings are higher. So the harp is really pretty. So that's all our instruments today. Let's remember if we can remember what they're all called. Okay, what was our first instrument that was the highest? If you said the violin, you're right. Then bigger than the violin. Oh, Katelyn lost her card. We had our viola, and then we watched a cello player who was sitting down and playing because that was even lower. And then we saw a double bass player who had to stand or like lean against a stool because his instrument was even bigger and even lower. And then we learned about our harp. Thank you for learning about these string instruments with me today, friends. I'll see you later. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.